In this episode, I am joined by Johan Hausen,
Taoist teacher, translator, Chinese medicine practitioner, and founder of Purple Cloud Press. Johan shares his life story from years of competitive Tae Kwon Do through his travels and travails in China in search of a master, and to his eventual training and discipleship in the Wudang Mountains. Johan reflects on his years learning classical and spoken Chinese, considers the challenges of translating ancient literature for modern readers, and reveals the unique metaphors and analogies used in textual descriptions of internal alchemy. Johan also describes the Taoist quest for immortality, explains his research into the dantien and the mineralogy of cinnabar, and recounts stories of his own encounters with spiritually advanced beings.
So without further ado, Johan Hausen.
Johan Hausen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so pleased to talk with you today, and we were put in touch and introduced by Mattias Daly, a previous guest of this podcast, and we had 4 fascinating discussions, Mattias and I, on the podcast, and he spoke very highly of you indeed, and urged me to interview you. So, of course, I agreed. And wow, what an amazing life and path you've had.
Yeah, I'm glad Mattias established that connection. He's actually a good friend of mine whom I visited in Taiwan, and he's incredibly knowledgeable. I actually look up to him. It's very rare to find someone of his expertise.
Oh, that's interesting. That does make me wonder, in fact. A lot of people know a lot of things. A lot of people practice and study various different arts and textual traditions, etc., and practice traditions. What is it about Mattias in particular, do you think, that stands out to you in terms of his knowledge?
So he's really, I would almost say, sacrificed his life for study. So he lived a long time in China, and then now he's lived for a long time in Taiwan, and just his level of language, which allows him to open doors and directly communicate with the Chinese-speaking world. A lot of people don't have that. They have to rely on texts. And often people are like, oh, I really like this translation, but that particular reader, they don't know Chinese. So I'm wondering, how can you assess a translation when you can't compare it with a source text? And so when I bring that up, they're like, yeah, but it reads really well. It's like, that's fine, you can like any text, but it doesn't make it necessarily accurate. And so for Mattias, he doesn't have that problem because he's written extensively in Chinese. And to get to that point, you have to dedicate so much time in the study of Chinese, which anyone who says learning Chinese is easy, I disagree with. It's an incredibly hard language to learn.
Yes, indeed. And you've spent also a significant amount of time in China. And was language study a prerequisite for your own training with Taoist masters?
It wasn't specifically a prerequisite, so I kind of fell into the role of having to pick up the language. I went there with some rudimentary language skills. I could order food, I could buy train tickets, I could understand a very superficial conversation. I could speak enough so that Chinese people were wowed, but I was far away from translating any Taoist live lecture. And so when it became clear that I was going to take on that role, I dedicated many hours over the winter of vocabulary reading, because the grammar in Chinese is very simple. It's very similar to German, to English. You have a subject, verb, object, and there's no tenses. There's like future, past. It's all the same. You don't have to learn conjugations, declinations. But I do recommend it to everyone. You just get a different level. There's certain terms that are hard to translate that I rather keep untranslated, or I would translate them and I would make a note of writing down the Chinese because I might come up with a better translation. And just to give one example, there's a word called wu xin, which translates as without heart mind. And so sometimes people translate it as a mindless state, which sounds quite negative in English, or no mind and without mind. And you never quite get there. And in Chinese, it's so clear, like wu xin. And then some people say it's without thoughts, without thinking mind. And all of a sudden, you've got 10 terms. You have to choose one of them.
And does that term encompass all those meanings or imply all of those meanings?
That's pretty much what it is. It's usually when you look up in a dictionary, you get 5 words that actually don't seem entirely connected. It's all of them in like a mixture or something like that, and hodgepodge, and you have to kind of figure out for yourself where you kind of lay an emphasis on it.
I'm curious. One of my interest is language learning and so on. So I wonder if I might ask you a couple of questions about that.
Sure.
You've done incredible translation work and published several books full of translated material. And in fact, your Purple Cloud Press publishing house also publishes various different works. Maybe we could talk about that press later. What was your method, if you like, or what was your approach for learning Chinese? And was there a different approach in learning the classical form of the language from the conversational form that you would presumably need to go about day-to-day business?
Yeah, there's absolutely a different approach. So basically for the spoken Chinese, and I do recommend that to a lot of people, when you want to communicate with Chinese, you need to speak. It doesn't matter if you can write or read. So the focus should always be on speaking. Once your speaking hits a certain level, you can then add the characters, because it actually helps you to identify a character. If someone says, if you ask a Chinese, what does Jing mean? He would be like, I cannot tell you. It's potentially 30 words you could mean. And then you can specify, I mean, Jingluo, the Jing of Jingluo. And then it's like, oh, okay, means meridian or channel. And that's even the case with surnames. If someone said, oh, my surname is One, and I've heard this play out live, and then it's like, which one is it? And then the person's like, it's the number one, which is 10,000. And then the other person goes like, oh, that's a rare surname. And that doesn't happen in English. Someone might say a name and you're not entirely sure how it's written, but you have a pretty good idea to write it down that someone else would be able to figure it out. And that's very unique Chinese, and it's very hard to explain these things in the Chinese language. So first you get your level up understanding, because you want to directly talk to people. A lot of peasants and farmers that I talked to, they couldn't write. So when I asked them, how do you write this? They were like, just waving me off. And then you learn the characters, and that's usually simplified for mainland China. And then for me, whenever I went to Hong Kong, same in Taiwan, I'm a little bit like an illiterate. Like I feel like I'm thrown back 10, 20 years, because I see all these signs and I'm like, the ones that are the same I recognize, but there's a huge number that I recognize them better than I can write them now. But so these are like almost different worlds. And the traditional one, you really need to look at other people's, like someone reliable at their translation, and figure out the constructs and the grammar. And you might have to buy a book where certain things are explained, because traditional Chinese is not spoken. It's very particular to old classical texts. Well, you can use the traditional characters in a modern speaking way, but if you were looking at the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi, that's not how people speak. There's certain words that you just find in books that often don't mean anything. That just indicate the end of a sentence, because Chinese didn't have punctuation back in the day, which makes it incredibly hard, because you can put one word to the previous sentence or one to the succeeding sentence. And so you have scholars arguing about that, because there's no word indicating there and no full stop or period to let you know. But there's also people who read and translate classical Chinese, but they couldn't hold up any conversation in spoken Chinese, because for them it's not important. They don't want to talk to anyone. They look at a piece of paper with the characters. And for me, that kills the original intention of a language, which is communication between people. And that's the important part that Mattias really nailed down, because he has these connections. He talks to someone, it's like, well, I'm a Taoist, or I'm interested in Taoism, and then this person like, oh, I know this priest in this temple, and it's there, and they describe it, and then a few weekends later, you can go there.
Yes, that's very interesting. And I wonder, certain translation endeavors, for example, if one was to translate Tibetan texts, religious texts, one thing that I understand translators will do, of course, they have their own command of the language, but they'll also check difficult points, obscure metaphors, or even the overall understanding with, say, a lineage holder associated with that text, or some sort of lama or kempo or something like that, who has knowledge around that subject. And that can be crucial to understanding what's written. Is that the same sort of thing in classical Chinese? Is there an interplay between the text and lineage masters or practitioners?
No, I would say that's actually absolutely missing, and I think it's quite valid. But the scholarly world would say that's anachronistic. You're taking someone who lives now to comment on a text that's potentially 2,000, 2,500 years old, and therefore they don't live in that time and it's no longer relevant. Whereas I believe that can be used, but it has to be signposted. It's an interpretation. And if you maybe talk to 10 different lineage holders, you get 10 different answers. So it should go in a footnote, this is such and such said this, and then people be like, oh yeah, that's really interesting, but that's not, there's no ultimate truth. It might be a take, it might be absolutely thought of in the same way across the lineages, but it might not. And I think it's really important just to signpost that.
And I think Taoism is known for its metaphors and its coded language, at least to a non-specialist such as myself. What are the challenges in interpreting the kind of metaphorical coded language that one sometimes finds in those old Taoist texts?
It really depends what text it is. So the metaphors or analogies, you find really in Internal Alchemy where you can read, you could translate it, and it's actually, when you look at the Chinese, it's like, yeah, that's actually translated correct, but it has no meanings. It's not even like a poem, it's even like a decoded poem. It's just a juxtaposition of words. And if you publish something like this without any endnotes or footnotes, I'm not sure if your time is spent the best. And the problem is that footnotes and endnotes take so much time. They might actually take longer than translating the text for someone who has a very good command of the language. And so people stay off it because there's so little money in translation and it's so time consuming. And it's a huge problem. You actually mentioned something that's hugely problematic. But some texts are not so metaphorical. The Tao Te Ching, I wouldn't say it's metaphor driven or anything. But for other texts, I read them as like, what does this mean? Like it means it's just a step in the dark.
And is that a situation where if you speak to 10 different lineage masters, you'll have 10 different interpretations of the metaphor? Or is there a sort of consonance in the understanding?
I can't make a definite statement on that, but I would at least assume there's certain, like, I take an example, the location of the dantien, of the elixir field, or it used to be the cinnabar field. Even the classical texts don't agree on that, so that you could actually provide a pretty lengthy chapters on like, this is what text such and such says. And then as a translator, it's not really your role or task to say this is right or this is wrong. The only thing I would say, like, this aligns with what my teacher taught me. But then it's down to the reader to decide what works for them. Like, I'm actually taking myself out of the judgment process. And I haven't asked 10 different lineage holders, but I would assume there are definitely more than slight variations. There's another term like Hyunman, the mysterious gate, where the interpretations can be quite vastly different. And then some texts even say like, oh, this text says it's between the eyebrows, and that's absolutely wrong. And so there's debate, and I think that's a beautiful thing. It's not really dogmatic in Taoism when it comes to these terms.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. Is there a sense in which this concept of the dantien changes over time? In other words, would a kind of chronological study of the dantien reveal a shifting concept from an older idea to a newer idea? Could that be part of what explains the different understandings, or is there something else going on there?
I believe there's something else going on because it doesn't really shift location in the body. It's actually quite minor in the differences. It's like the amount of tsun below the navel, between the kidneys and the umbilical and the navel. But I can't really see that there's something that like a progression or anything. It's China was a huge place, so you would expect someone in the north and someone in the south. They didn't have direct communication. We see this in text when someone even in the center describes the southerners, and you're like, that's not how the south is. It's like it's miasmic qi and everyone gets sick and it's epidemics. And it's like you just try to delineate them from the center where the government is, but you've actually never traveled to them because people quite happily live there. Also in description of plants and stuff, I've done quite a few food studies in China, or read on food studies, and you can tell they've never seen the fruit. Like they just described them from some traveler who reported it to them.
That's very interesting indeed. One of the differences with the dantien that I hear occasionally quite impassioned debate about is whether it's a physical structure that one builds through various means, or a sort of energetic, non-physical, I suppose, by that definition, or maybe somewhere in between physical and non-physical, pre-existing center that one cultivates. So there's a sense of creating it or cultivating what's already there. And I hear that debate quite often among Taoist practitioners. Do you have a sense of that debate and how it refers back to the history of the dantien in Taoism?
I've never been privy to that debate, so I'm a little bit surprised, but it's interesting because my teacher would tell people on the first day, like, put your chi, put your thoughts back into your dantien. So it doesn't seem something like you have to create. It seems like a cauldron or a space, as you said, that's there, that has to be cultivated and filled. It's like we have to create chi. That's technically correct. We generate chi from food, from air, and various processes, but it's already there. We just have to harness it. My teacher says chi is everywhere, because people ask, like, is it worth like hugging a tree or doing qigong in the ocean? It's like, why would you do that? The chi is everywhere. You don't have to immerse yourself in the water. And so I'm strongly from that school who believes it's a space that's already there, almost like trying to describe an anatomical position where you're like, oh, this is the heart, and you just have to make it healthier, or this is the liver, but it exists. It's already there. My teacher actually compares it with the chakras. He says it's an energetic center too. Because when I teach Qigong and talk about the Elixir field, I would have to really go into it. So to say an energetic center, you don't get any follow-up questions. Everyone's like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense. And the location, usually people have a good awareness of that area.
But it would be more precise to say elixir fields, that
yes.
you think. Yeah. What's disambiguated by that term?
It's the problem with the word dan, which can mean a lot of things, actually, which is quite interesting. So I think elixir is more appropriate because cinnabar is a substance, and that's usually called jusha, and is now used in medicine, used to be used in external alchemy in Taoism. But it doesn't refer to, usually when you say cinnabar, it can also be referring to the color, because it's quite red. Actually, I've seen it brownish too, but it's usually, or pinkish, but it's usually red. So you use that word also to describe something that is red in color. And then the term elixir would be wrong, but the word cinnabar just doesn't make sense. It's actually a mineral, it's a substance. So I think elixir makes much more sense, because when you talk about cultivating or circulating the elixir chi, that makes sense. But you say cinnabar chi, I would expect it to be red, and the color red is never mentioned for it either. I think it's quite minute, but it's I think there's a change. There has been a change because you also have dantian, which is the elixir, the elixir classics. And if you said the cinnabar classics, again, it sounds a bit odd. But then you could argue maybe they were written in cinnabar. So you could maybe start a debate, but I'm not sure if it's so conducive for me personally to engage in a debate like this. I actually wrote a little chapter on cinnabar, which I went really into the mineralogy of it, and I was it's for Gehong's Baoputze, Master Embracing Simplicity, which is hopefully coming out beginning of next year, spearheaded by Luis Comiathi. And then I went really into what are the Chinese saying about the mineral cinnabar, and is that actually correct from a chemistry point of view that we have now?
And what did you find?
It's actually quite accurate, because they talk about transforming cinnabar into mercury, and you can do that by just evaporating the mercury. You don't collect it, but you still separate it. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but cinnabar used to be used for gold mining, because it combines with gold, and then you evaporate the mercury, and then you just, like, it's hugely toxic, and people are probably dying left, right, and center. But that's how you extract small particles of gold. Like, I thought, like, you would just get them from the sand, and you would just see like chunks, but like the little dusty parts, you actually extract them through mercury or cinnabar. It's actually mercury. You put mercury in, it combines with the gold, and then you evaporate the mercury, and then you have the gold. But obviously mercury is part of cinnabar.
That's not obvious to me, I'm afraid. Sorry. I'm not much of a chemist when it comes to these things. That's incredible. So that's incredible that your studies of this tradition take you into organic chemistry.
It was a sideline. I was interested because I never looked into those sayings like you revert cinnabar into mercury. And then I was like, how is this actually possible? Because the external alchemists, they were quite savvy when it came to chemistry. And I always look at a text, and when there's like something outrageous in terms of the medicine world, there's some outrageous treatment methods. And I was like, is there something else to it? Like, are we just looking at it through our own tainted lens? So for example, I'll give you an example. So for example, there's a talk about burning the underwear of a menstruating woman, and you take in the ashes with water. And then, so this is usually called an esoteric method, or probably even more derogatorily. And then my friend was like, what about if the hormones actually don't get destroyed through the burning process, and you actually take in female hormones, and then you get a different lens? I'm not saying this is necessarily right, but why would you go to the incredible length of putting this in a text, writing this, when it's just like, wow, that's absolute imagination, to use a gentle word. And so when they write about these conversion process or reversion processes of minerals or chemicals, I'm like, maybe they actually did know what they were doing. And that's what they did. Just the way they describe it is not a language that we would use nowadays, because they didn't know that cinnabar is mercuric sulfide. And so we just have to retranslate in a language we understand nowadays.
Wow. Well, we've gone on quite a safari here at the beginning. It's so fascinating, these subjects. Perhaps we could loop back now to your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, I know you began martial arts at quite a young age, 13 years old, I think, with Tae Kwon Do. What was the context of your upbringing? What sort of a family did you come from? What was the context in which you grew up? And what was it that drew you to the martial arts?
So I think that's probably rather boring. I wish I could sort of spice it up a little bit, but I come from a middle-class family. I had a very good childhood. I was always into sports, which something that I just found for myself. I like team sports, so I played soccer, which you usually do in Germany. And then I played table tennis, which is an individual sport. I like the reaction speed you have to have, and I had a really nice club, and I was doing sports pretty much every day, even at the weekends. And then I remember this specific incident at soccer where we had this training session and this other guy kicked me, without the ball. The ball wasn't involved. And I looked at him, it was like this short guy, and I was like, nah, I don't need this, I'm out of here. And it wasn't even a conflict that I had sleepless nights over, but I was just like, that's getting competitive in a way. I didn't need that. So I went and carried on with table tennis, and then I didn't have a team anymore to compete, because two people also played tennis, and then they played too much tennis, and so their table tennis didn't really look so pretty anymore and wasn't so successful. And then I didn't have a team to play with, and that's what I liked. And so I took on Tae Kwon Do because I liked the kicks. It was the flashy kicks, and I wasn't a huge fan of Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan. It wasn't even the movie industry. I just liked the idea of having very good control of my legs. It wasn't self-defense either. I didn't grow up in any rough upbringing. I grew up very safely.
In Germany?
Yeah.
And could you say something about your Tae Kwon Do training? I believe you competed, you had many fights, competitive fights in that sport.
Yeah, so I think I was lucky. I really think there's a certain body type. So I'm quite tall and quite wiry or skinny even. And so this is an advantage in Taekwondo, because all the people, there's one guy I thought was taller than me, and everyone else was remarkably shorter than me. And that's really good for head kicks and stuff. So in Taekwondo, for those who don't know, you don't use your arms. I have no boxing skills, or it's the very traditional blocks. It's not useful for anything. So you actually drop your hands wherever you want them. You don't even hold them up to protect yourself. So Taekwondo is really based on legs. And so I have very good control of my legs and literally none of my hands and arms or elbows. And I got really into the competitive world. I wanted to see how far I could take it. And I got into the national team, and then it sounds I'm actually, looking back now, it's totally fine, but I missed my chance to compete in the national team 3 times because of injury and sickness. And one was in Toulouse in France, one was in Amsterdam, and the third time was in Iran, and that fell apart. So that would have been all funded. We fly there, we have a competition, we fly back. And that was shortly before George W. Bush declared it the axis of evil. And so they considered it not safe to fly to Tehran and compete. That was the only time I wasn't sick. But my problem was there was no Olympic weight class. So the Olympic weight classes are different than the one you compete in Germany. And the Olympic weight classes actually skipped mine, which meant I would have to fight someone who's 6 kilos heavier, which is a huge difference, or 6 kilos lighter, which I couldn't make weight-wise. I was already cutting 3 kilos. And so that was kind of my limitation. And then I decided eventually I just plateaued and I needed to do something completely different. And I want to go to China, get really fit, and then go back and do Taekwondo again. But once I was in China, I was hooked on Kung Fu, and I was like, I'm not gonna go back to Taekwondo. So overall, I had about like over 100 fights. Actually typed it all up and actually have the results and the people I fought from pretty much the first fight. Truth to be told, I don't know where that document is at the moment because I crashed quite a few computers in my life, but it will be somewhere.
So you went to China to try to get healthy so you could return to compete in Taekwondo. Where did that idea come from? Where did the idea that you could go to China to become healthy come from?
Basically, I needed something new. So I looked into going to Korea first. And then I was like, nah, that's too similar. It's just going to be more of the same. And then I read somewhere that Kung Fu was the cradle of all martial arts. I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to the basics. And my idea literally was like to go running for 2 hours on a fight day and then fight later because I wanted my stamina to be so incredible. And it was healthy and fit, and also just probably reignite my passion for Taekwondo, I suppose. And I didn't know much about China. I didn't speak any words. I can't even say I could say ni hao, which most people could. I had no interest in the language. I wanted to go there and train. I wanted to see people demonstrate because I'm a visualizing person. And then I wanted to go back and do Taekwondo. That was the original plan. Turned out very differently.
So how old were you when you went there? And can you talk about that first contact with the country?
I was 20. So basically, in that whole biography, it's also the case that I tore my meniscus or my cartilage. And so I recovered from that. I came back. I realized people hadn't really advanced to a degree where I couldn't keep up with them. But I realized, but I noticed that I was missing something. It was like 5% that I needed to win fights. And that was also part of going to China and getting those 5% back. And so I was 20. It was just after graduating from school and recovering from that knee injury because I wanted to go a year earlier as well. And then I went into China and I looked at quite a few schools, but I didn't book any school in advance because people told me, go there, have a look, don't sign up, see how the training is, and then sign up. Otherwise, you might end up for 6 months in a school that you're terribly unhappy. And so I went there, and when I arrived in Beijing, I got to the train station. I got my train somehow, just like fumbling along in English and hands and whatever. And then it turned out I was at the wrong train station. Like a student checked my ticket. I was like, you're in the wrong. I think there's 4 train stations in Beijing. And so I get to the right one. I had plenty of time. And I get to the city next, close to Shaolin. I wanted to practice Shaolin Kung Fu. I got to Zhengzhou, and there I realized like no one understands me. And I had a little bit of a meltdown. I was like, what am I doing here? Like, the thing is, I did feel quite comfortable like in myself in a foreign country because I knew I just need money and a healthy body and I can do anything. I can jump on the next plane and I'm out of here. But I was like, why didn't I book the school, have someone pick me up at the hotel and take me to the school? That would have been the easy route. I'm not sure if it would have been the better. But eventually I went to school and just paid monthly and then looked at other schools and changed schools, met some amazing people, had a really, really good time. Because when you train 8 hours a day and you don't have to care about food, cooking, taxes, work, it's actually very easy on the mind. You don't burn any extra energy on or ATP in your brain. It's just your physical exhaustion, which at some stage you just get used to that. You don't walk properly and you have little aches and pains as long as it doesn't prevent you from training.
What was the training like there?
It's very daunting because you practice with a lot of very young kids. It's almost like a school. They are taught Chinese, English, even though they don't speak English at all, I'd say, and other subjects within the school, and they train. And so I was by far the oldest, I'd say. So I was training with 6-year-olds. So we went on this run in the mornings, and the 6-year-old I could beat, but then the next ones, like the 10-year-olds, it was getting harder. My goal was just like, let's not be last or second or third last. It was quite interesting for someone who's very, very competitive because they were just so fit. So they would run in the morning from 6 to 7. Sometimes they would do a little bit of like military marching, which was just part of it for them to later get a job with their training, even though they might never have to march and just stand in front of a hospital for 8 hours. And then we had breakfast, and then we had a 2.5 hours or 2 hours, which is usually some kind of form. So you could choose a weapon, basics as well, and the same in the afternoon. And then we would usually train in the evening and review stuff, review the form, just a sequence of movements. There was one year where they also did some Tai Chi, but that was just for the foreigners, because as the foreigners, you have to be actually separated other than the morning running class, because they know like 6-10 weapons, and you come then, you know nothing. You would need an individual trainer or coach for yourself. So we, the foreigners, usually trained in a small group from 2 to 6 people, and then that really worked the best. Even though I always wanted to train with the Chinese, I was like, I'm no different, and I was super competitive. It just doesn't work that way. You just don't do yourself any good.
The training there is notoriously rigorous. As you say, there are foreigners that train there, and some of them write books about it or make documentaries about it. And usually what's emphasized is the tremendous physical demand, stretching, holding static postures, the infamous morning run, etc. Looking back, what are your reflections on the design and structure of the training? Is it as brutal as some memoirs have made out? Was there any concession made for example, your knee or things of that nature?
I think it's glamorized. I think I always think about this book called the Shaolin Lie. You probably could write one about the Wudang Lie as well. But so when you look at the movies and you have a teacher and you're in a stance and they kick you and you fall over, this just doesn't happen. It's very hard on the body, but there are people training for the UFC in the States, and they train just as much, if not harder, on a day-to-day basis. It's just hard physical training, and I believe in Cirque du Soleil they also train equally hard. The only difference is you have kids that usually are forced, and I do believe they do. I know they do that in Russia too, where you just pushed into the splits. You can't do that in a Western country. You get problems with the law. And now, for example, Jackie Chan, he's not a martial artist. He studied at the Beijing Opera. But I've heard that the parents, they sign a contract that the teacher is actually allowed to break their bones, because it would happen so often. They would have to somehow legally cover their backs. And that obviously you wouldn't find in the UFC gym or in a Cirque du Soleil training camp. But other than that, it's just, I don't think it's any, I'd lie if I say it's any harder on the body than what other top athletes do. I sometimes even wonder if they overtrain a little bit. And the biggest problem is there's a lot of stomping and a lot of jumping in Shaolin Kung Fu. And you do that by the roadside on concrete. And as you said, that's the knees that goes, the knees and the hip. Like shoulder injuries were much, much rarer. It's usually knees and the hips, and sometimes the ankles. When you run, you can sprain them. In the morning, maybe you're overly tired and things like that. So I actually think less is sometimes more, but they actually had a day and a half off, which is pretty good, because some people say in classical Kung Fu, you train every day. If you don't train for one day, it's 3 steps back.
I understand that part of the reason you went there was to learn techniques to speed up recovery and heal from injuries. Is that this same period? Were you also then seeking out therapeutic techniques to restore the body?
No, I wouldn't say so. I had a routine where on Sundays I would go into a sauna that was just in the town just to recover. But at that time, my injuries weren't actually stopping me. They were just sort of in the background. Some people would get massages, but I'm not such a big fan of them, because they make all my toxins come out, and then I'm absolutely wiped out. So that would mean my day off, I'm wiped out, which is the time I have off, which I don't want to be just lying in bed and sleeping. But that came much later. I generally would say in the Shaolin schools, there wasn't like, oh, you're injured, let's take you there. I didn't quite feel that, or have a doctor inside, or have people use like poultices or Chinese herbs or foot soaks. I really didn't see that. I think it was very, very neglected. And even though it exists in Shaolin Kung Fu as well, we all know the Dita Jiu or the Dieta Jiu in Mandarin, the trauma liniment that you rub on joint pain or muscle pain.
So how long were you there, and what happened next?
The first time I was there for 9 months. I actually had been given permission to stay there for 8 years to become a Kung Fu teacher. But at the 9-month mark, it became very clear that my body wouldn't be able to go through it because I had a major stomach bug which just wouldn't go away. I actually went to Beijing to have it looked at and to have everything checked, and they looked into my stomach and they're like, we can't find anything. And for me, I was like, okay, there's nothing wrong, I can just train. But it just doesn't work that way if you have a lot of stomach cramps and things like that. And then I didn't quite accept defeat, and then I broke my finger, and that day I was like, okay, I need to have a break. And I went home. I flew home on my birthday with my finger in a little cast and had it operated the very same day I arrived in Germany. Because I didn't want to have an operation in China. I didn't want to risk losing full mobility of my index finger. It's quite an important finger. And the way I did it, no one could ever reproduce that. I actually was using a cudgel or a stick, and I got between my 2 fingers and just spread them. I never tried, but they told me my index finger I could have put in like next to my thumb. And I don't know how it happened. I was just not in a good frame of mind. I wasn't focused, and I can't explain it. I literally can't explain it. But I think generally it was a sign to call it quits for then and just reassess the whole situation. Because if you become a Kung Fu teacher and you get injured, how are you going to make a living? It's very real for people using their body for teaching, unless you don't demonstrate. But I was always like, I want to demonstrate everything I teach.
So you returned home to Germany and decided to lay off for a while, or so what did you do in Germany, and what was your mindset returning to your home country after that time in China?
I wasn't in a good mindset at all. It felt like a failure. I knew I had to come home. The index finger recovered quite fast, like 2 months, but the stomach didn't. And I was like, I don't want to go back in the same or something similar might happen. I get another injury. So I actually was home for 8 months. I went back in July. And by that time, I also decided to enroll in a course in London, which is a filmmaking course, really. And so I was like, I want to go back to China. I left a lot of stuff in China, being like, I'll be back in 2 months. And I at least wanted to finish that. There was one form which with a 9-section whip that I wanted to finish, just to have a clear finishing line. And so I went back for like a month and a half, finished everything, went well, because I didn't have the pressure of becoming a Kung Fu teacher anymore. My stomach was a lot better. I went to London, and I think my stomach was normal within like 2 months, like perfectly normal. It was all stress related. I put too much pressure. Looking back, I don't think I have the physique, because I'm quite long. It's usually better to be stuck here, smaller, and you have to be used to those impacts on your knees and stuff. I don't think it would have done me any good, even if I'd stayed for 2 more years in China.
So please take us forward in your biography. What happened next? Did you go to London after all?
I went to London. Yes, I studied for 2 years. I realized the study was what I would call a Mickey Mouse course, so it wouldn't help you to find a job afterwards. And I got an invitation from Lindsay Wei, who I met in Shaolin for the first time, and she had traveled on to Wudang. So she's a martial arts teacher and a very good friend of mine, and she invited me to a Taoist program in the Wudang Mountains. And that was actually 6 months before my course finished. But I didn't even think twice. I was like, I'm going to go there. It's just a matter of, do I get this piece of paper, which I probably never need, or do I not get it? And so I handed in all my essays before I left. I believe I had people sign me in classes that I was present. And there was one course that was problematic because there was a studio shoot. And there was 2 days of studio shoots, and you could only miss one to pass the module. But I would obviously miss both of them. So I went to my lecture, I was like, I'm going to miss it. Like, there's no negotiation, I'm going to miss it. Is there any way of still passing the module? And they actually set a precedence for me that I could do what's called a stop frame animation. When you, let's say you put a couple of pebbles in one arrangement, you take a picture, you move them a little bit, you take a picture, and when you have that 25 pictures per second, it becomes like, it looks like the pebbles are moving into different shapes. And I've done that, and then it went through. So actually in the end graduated, even though I missed a lot of months of my studies. And interestingly enough, I booked this one-way flight. Because I was like, I don't know how long I'm going to be there. And I booked it with an airline called Hong Kong Airlines, which you probably don't know because it no longer exists. Because the day before my flight, I look it up because it departs from a small airport and it says they've gone into liquidation. I was like, this is a joke. And it no longer existed. My ticket was gone. There was no refund. Actually, there was one much later. And so I just was like, is this a sign for me to stay? Because I could have still just gone to college, or they wouldn't have prevented me to finishing the course as planned, like, or officially. And I was like, no, this is just a test. And so I bought another ticket and flew like 2 or 3 days later, and I filed a form to get my money back. And after 5 years, they got back to me. It's like, oh, we're gonna reimburse you $8, but the processing fee is $5. So do you want to have those $3? And I was like, no, I'm actually not gonna bother going through any more documents. It was, yeah.
What happened in Wudang? Tell us the story of this journey.
This is really the trajectory I'm on now. So I met my teacher, Li Shifu, introduced by Lindsay. This was the first program run for foreigners, temple opening its gates. It's actually also very rare to be able to lodge, to be allowed to lodge in a temple. And so we lived there. This didn't go smoothly at all because it was I think a 6-month course, but the Beijing Olympics happened at the same time, so they canceled all visa. Or they didn't cancel them, but you couldn't extend them. So we were all on a 1-month visa, being told you can easily extend it, and they were just like, no, you can't. And so people left, some people went home, one person traveled from China to Turkey on trucks and stuff, other people, and me and a couple of other people were enrolled at a university in Kunming to get a student visa. That was the only way. And that sort of took me until November, but then with all the visa runs, the visa complications, I was like, okay, this is as far as I can get. I arrived in April and I was like, okay, it's probably good to go home in November. And that's where I had decided to enroll in a Chinese medicine program because I met 2 acupuncturists. And I was like, yeah, that just makes sense. And so I started researching and started studying acupuncture in New Zealand.
And what were you studying in Wudang?
So in Wudang, we studied a very comprehensive schedule. We studied Qigong in the mornings usually. We studied Tai Chi. We studied a lot of theories like 5 phases, Taoist history, the lineage history. And then there's something called Yang Shen Gong, which is a longevity form. There's a form that resembles, we usually call it Bagua just to give people an idea. It's translated as 8 trigrams palm, but it's actually just similar that we walk in circles, but we actually defend to the outside, whereas in Bagua you actually are facing the inside, and we walk in an 8, which is a different shape than just circles. And that's a very long form. If you walk it slowly, it takes up to 10 minutes, I believe. It was a lot. We studied a little bit of music, but because the official course was only run for a few months, I would say we scratched the surface, but it was enough to give me an idea that there was lots to learn and that I would want to come back, but I needed to sort out my life later in the West, and that's where the acupuncture study came in.
And the acupuncture study presumably gave you a legal remit to practice Chinese medicine and pursue your studies and professionalize that journey. Was that the thinking behind it?
Yeah, and in some countries you have to be registered. In New Zealand, Australia, some countries it's not registered yet, but it might be. And I just wanted to work within the legal framework at that time and to have stability instead of, like, as a Kung Fu teacher, for example, the very original plan, you don't have stability. You constantly have to think how to make your business work. And I wouldn't say as an acupuncturist you get rich, but you have that. Like now, for example, I'm employed, so I know exactly how much money I get from that every month. It doesn't even vary by a cent. And when a patient doesn't show up, they apologize. I'm like, that's totally fine. Like I'm employed, I get paid the same. And now I have public holidays, I get paid. Before it was like public holiday was a bad thing because I would have to work on a Saturday to have the same income to catch up on it somewhere.
That's an interesting combination of qualities. That attraction to stability and predictability and security, I suppose, of conventional employment with this impulse to travel to very far countries to practice these very challenging arts. No, okay.
I don't know if they're challenging. I think it's just I'm just programmed in a way that if I want to learn something, it doesn't matter what it takes. Like for me, it doesn't matter how far the country is, because at the end of the day, I just have to board a plane. Back in the days, you would somehow get there like months and months, or even take a ship when it was a little bit easier. It's just problematic if, for example, now with the employment, I don't have so much time to spend in China. So when I only go once a year for a month, and I feel like that's too short. I know that people go for a week, but for me, 1 month is short. But if it was longer, I literally would have to quit. And then in the back of your mind, you might not have that peace and stillness when you're traveling and be like, so what comes after? I would have to build everything up again. And I guess the ideal scenario for me might be do 6 months in China and then 6 months in the West, but you have to have some really good passive income that's still rolling while you're traveling.
I wonder if you might talk a bit about your journey as a practitioner through this period, because you didn't just stay in Wudang for that period of time. I read in your bio that you spent something like 5 years with your teacher and even became a member of the Lineage. Could you talk about your journey then as a practitioner beyond this initial Wudang visit?
As a practitioner in the West or in general?
Well, wherever you were.
So when it comes to China, I haven't actually seen a lot of China. I've seen some big cities like Beijing. I've been to Hong Kong just because you used to be able to get a visa in Hong Kong for mainland China. I have never been to Shanghai. I've been to Wuhan, which now everyone knows, but that's just because you can get a quick train to Wudang. But I haven't seen, like, I'm not a good guide when it comes to China, because I really spend most of my time with my teacher. I'm a firm believer in less is more, like staying in one place and really getting to know the people, in this case my teacher, where the language skill comes in again. Like, it's no good if you stay in a place but you're just eating and sleeping there. And so I really dedicated literally all my time, other than the one in Shaolin, to being with my teacher in the temple through the seasons. And it's I think it's a one in a lifetime chance that I was given. But there's a saying in Chinese, where there's gain, there's loss; where there's loss, there's gain. And I lost a lot of years in my 30s being in a temple far away from a culture I was familiar with. So I wouldn't say it was hard, but when you're in China, you're always the foreigner. You're never going to be referred to as the Taoist or the acupuncturist or anything else. You always have the label of foreigner. And it doesn't matter if I speak better Chinese than most villagers. It doesn't matter if I know more about Chinese history than a lot of Chinese. You are the foreigner. And so the word foreigner is Lao Wai. And I have discussions kind of heated with Chinese where they're like, it's not negative. And I was like, it means old outside. Anyone who is outside is not part of a group. So that's, for me, that's not positive. There's no way of saying like China is Zhongguo, the Middle Kingdom, and everything else is outside. And the Chinese have a history of within China, the peripheries are the ones where it's like almost dodgy, it's looked down upon. It's where like shamanism comes from, or Uism. It's where like these practices with like poisons and curses happen. It's like, we don't want to have anything to do with that. And so you take the periphery outside of China, and then you have the Lao Wai. And it's not the worst time. There's Yang Weizi, which is like a foreign ghost. That's really racist. But for me, Lao Wai, in its reflection of the meaning of the word, it's not positive. I know friends who have called Chinese like Lao Nei to just hold up a mirror to them, and it actually offends them, even though I don't think it means something in particular. But yeah, this is my take on the perception of foreigners. So you never fully accept it in a way. They might respect you. They don't like curse at you or like tut at you, but they will be like, especially in the countryside, they look at you and they might actually point at you and be like, hey, Lao Wai, look, Lao Wai. And it's like, I don't do that in Germany. I don't point at people of other ethnicities and be like, hey, look at this foreigner, because this is a very country-based concept of this is us and there's the outside. And I think anyone who lived in China for a longer time has being at least aware of the dangers of falling into this trap of just feeling uncomfortable and just being, I guess, pushed to the fringes in a way, or maybe segregated if you wanted to be a little bit harsher.
Segregated into expat communities, that sort of thing, or
that happens when you want to sort of resist of not being part of a group. You find people like-minded, and that's not even like people from the same country. It can just be like, oh, now we are white people, we understand each other in a way of, and then you get you can get a very dangerous dynamic where you have groups of foreigners who then refuse to learn Chinese, and then you get that in any country where they live for like 10-20 years, and you're like, wow, you actually never bothered learning the language, and they have maybe a child that grew up there, so they come to the doctors with them, and I'm like, anyone can learn a language. You can learn a language when you're 80. It might not go fast, but you can learn it. And when you decide to live in a country, I personally believe you have to assimilate. So I would never live in a country without learning its language, which for me is difficult because I feel my brain is full of languages. There's no more space. But I wouldn't live, for example, in Portugal and be like, I'm not going to learn Portuguese, because I've been in shops where I point at Mandarin. So it's like, wow, I haven't been in a country where I had to point for a long time. It's just very odd.
So how was that for you, that dealing with that, I suppose, othering of the foreigner in China? Was that something that you struggled with whilst you were there? Did it build up I've heard people in similar situations describe a kind of resentment that can eventually build, and in a sense of just leaving and not wanting to go back. And, I've heard that sort of thing can creep up on people who are training in countries that are not their own. Did that sort of thing happen to you, or how did you metabolize that?
It definitely did, and I think you described it well. It creeps up on you. You might not realize, but then you just get frustrated when people talk about you behind your back, but they know you can hear them, but they just assume you don't speak Chinese. I've had like the most ridiculous conversation, like me and my friend are in this village, and two people look at us, and one goes to the other, and where do you think these guys are from? And the guy goes like, they're American, and his friend goes like, yeah, you're right. And we look at each other like, should we say something? Like, I'm German, my friend is Italian. I don't think we look American at all. But they just had this conversation that we weren't part of. And when you try to embarrass them, they're not embarrassed. When you're like, what are you talking about? They just look at you like, oh, you speak Chinese. Whereas in the West, when you talk about someone, assuming they don't understand you and they understand you, you're a little bit embarrassed. You feel a bit ashamed. They don't at all. It's like, whoa, cool, you speak Chinese. It's like, oh, you just talked about us. That's pretty rude. And it's like, they're like, for them, it's just like, nah, that's just normal. And yeah, you get a little bitter, and you're trying to get back at them, and you be like, you walk with your friend, you have two Chinese in front of you, we're like, where are these guys from, in Chinese to each other? And then my friend's like, oh, I think they're Japanese. And then the Chinese turn around, it's like, what? And you're trying to hold up a mirror. I'm not sure if it's the best method, but you at least, I guess it's some kind of humor if you don't do it like getting really angry inside. But for me, it was just about timing. Like, I think I would compare that to meeting maybe your parents. It's good if you meet them for a week, but anything longer, it might get a bit challenging for most people, just because of a dynamic where it's a little bit difficult. And so in China, if you do 6 months, that's why I mentioned 6 months. Here, there's an end to it. You have like, oh, in 6 months, I'm going to be in an environment where I walk down the street and I'm just going to be one of everyone else. Like, I'm just left alone. It's not draining. It's not energy consuming. And for me, the second thing is like, why am I in China? I'm not in China for work. I wasn't like, I'm there of my free will, and I'm there to learn. So this actually is taken to extreme by my friend, who's like, I don't care if I don't understand some Chinese, because like local dialects and the way people speak, pronounce can be very difficult. He's like, I don't care if I don't understand anyone else. I just need to understand Li Shifu, because that's the person I want to learn from. And that's almost like, you can almost say, you try not to care about what all the other people think about foreigners and their stereotypes, as long as because you're there with your teacher. And that personally helped me. Like, I had people literally come up to me. Like, I started, I'll be honest with you, I haven't done that in a while, but I started saying I'm from different countries, because I got bored about talking about BMW and Hitler. I was like, these are not two subjects. I'm not into cars at all, and I'm not into Hitler. I had a guy come up to me, it's like, yeah, no, Hitler was bad, but what he did properly. I was like, what are you talking about? He killed 6 million Jews. Are you saying that's a positive trait that you tried to kill Jews and you did it properly. And that's where my conversation ended. I was like, we don't need to talk anymore. Like, that's where I draw the line. And so I was sometimes saying I'm from Iceland and like weird countries. And then they would be like, is there snow? And like, yeah, there's always snow. Just also to practice different words, different vocabulary, because I had it down, talking about Hitler and BMW. And Germans are very vengeance, so very conscientious. That would be another stereotype. I was like, yeah, I've got lazy Germans too, but I understand the punctuality everyone believes in. And so yeah, timing, just knowing that it's a limited amount until you go into an environment where you just blend in with everyone else. I think that helps. So someone said like you have to live there, you have to arrange yourself differently. You have to change your mind, how you perceive things and just culture and traditions.
That's fascinating to get a glimpse into what it was like for you to spend so much time in China and the experiences you had. I wonder if you might explain the lineage that you're a part of and the training that you're involved in, and what is its aim? Is it a spiritual aim ultimately? Is it a martial aim? Is it a healing aim? Or are those categories not really the right way to think about it? What is the training all about? And how is your path through it?
So it's really about, I would say it's about levels. So one of them you mentioned, which is health, well-being. And for that you have Qigong, you have Tai Chi, you have longevity practices, which are very similar to a moving Qigong form. We have diet, and this feeds in very much with Chinese medicine as well. You have the various healing methods, be it herbs, be it massage, be it acupuncture, gua sha, moxa. This is all about health. And so when I look at this level of health, the idea is to live longer. Because if you live 10, 15 years longer, you have 10, 15 more years to cultivate. But health is not the ultimate gain. Of course, everyone likes the idea of turning 100 and still being cognitively fresh, being able to live on their own, being able to do their shopping, which does happen. But you're going to die. That's a reality. And it's we're all going to find out one day what happens afterwards. But the goal of the Taoists was to not just extend life, but to cultivate, and that cultivation as an ultimate goal has immortality. And immortality now, I think it's a good translation. There has been a little bit of a pushback. Now people talk about transcendence, which might be considered a bit modern. I don't think it's a better term. It's just, if you prefer it, like calling an immortal transcendent. Doesn't really matter to me. I'm not really invested in that discussion. And then there's the idea of what does immortality mean? And there was so epitomized when one of the students of Li Shifu asked, I don't want to become immortal. It's just going to be more of the same. So he thought an immortal would be like a human being that lives forever. So you have to go to the toilet, you have to eat. It's just going to be drama, hurt, sickness, all the things, but you just do it forever in eternity. And this is what my teacher would call use your present mindset to think about something that is outside of your mindset or so far beyond your mindset that you can't grasp it, just like the universe is infinite. No one can grasp that because you think about something and you draw a limit, a border, and then there's more, and then there's more, and you're like, it doesn't end, it cannot end, there must be an end. But they say the universe is endless, and it makes sense, right? Because once you have a border, something has to be outside the border. And so an immortal means you don't need to do these things. You don't go to the toilet, you have become one with the Tao, so you don't have yin, you don't have yang, you don't have anger, you don't have happiness. You've gone back to the state of the Tao, which probably can be closely imagined to the state before you were born, which isn't painful, right? Zhuangzi says that why you're afraid of death. Do you know what it was before you were born? That wasn't so bad, wasn't it? And so the goal is to break the wheel. If you think about the wheel, this is the life we're in, or the Buddhists would say the sixth path, to break it and go outside of it. That's the ultimate goal of all practices. But if someone told you can live until 100 with a healthy body, doing the things you like, that's not so bad if you even get to that stage, right? So that's how the practices are really structured.
When one attains this state of immortality, are you still embodied? Do you still have a physical form? Or are you some sort of incorporeal presence? Is there a sense of I consciousness? Is there still a sense of oneself in that whole thing? Or is that also transcended?
In Taoism, you take your body with you. So you don't leave the body or the bodily shell behind it. It's considered that you unify your yin body with your yang body, your physical body with maybe what you call a more of ethereal body. And take that with you. So any practice, and my teacher would often stress that practice where you burn your body is not in line. He wouldn't say it's wrong, but he would say it's not aligned with Taoist theories, because you need that body, that's your vessel, and you don't leave it behind, you take it with you. And then you have stories where they are to be taken with a grain of salt, where someone is able to be physical, but also to be aphysical, material, immaterial. You can shift between these two states. You can condense chi, or you can scatter it. So you could be both. You could be ethereal with an immaterial body, but then at times you could actually appear to someone and just walk around, grab things, carry them. And there's an example of someone traveling, and he goes to a market and he would buy melons, and then he can come back with the melons in this physical form. So it's not like a ghost hovering around who can just go through maybe walls but cannot touch things or move things or materialize. And that's where the immortals come on, when they appear to people and interact and then just dissipate, and they're like, where is this person gone? It's like, oh, and then they realize it's Immortal Lu Dongbing or Zhong Li Quan or someone else of the 8 Immortals.
How achievable is that goal considered to be in your particular lineage of Taoism? And you mentioned Buddhism there, and I'm thinking of Buddhism, and in the different lineages and sects and so on, there are quite different ideas about how achievable it is to become whatever, a Buddha or Bodhisattva or whatever, at different levels and so on.
It's incredibly difficult. They have the analogy of, if you imagine the hairs on an ox, it's the number of horns that can achieve it, and the number of hairs are not people; these are cultivators, and that gives you an idea how hard it is. But it's like in Taoism, the original idea was there is no transmigration, reincarnation, so you have to achieve it this life. There is no second. You can't bank on it. Anyone who tells you, I guarantee you there's a next life, they can't know. No one knows. So why take the risk if you have this life in the human body? And even in Buddhism, when they talk about eons of lifetimes until you get a human body back, it's the same in Buddhism, Taoism. You need your human body to do the last step. As an animal, may it be a fox, a tree, you can get pretty high, but you cannot jump out of the wheel. So you have to wait for the next human body, and that can be a very, very long time away. So make use of this body, try your best. And that's the path I'm on. Like, I will try my best. Will I achieve it? When you look at the hairs on an ox, highly unlikely, but I still want to give it a shot. Like, I'm not going to be like, okay, that's impossible, let's not do it. You still want to try, because you have this body now. Just like you have a body now, I have a body now. Let's do it. Let's try it. Let's try our best.
And is there a consolation prize, so to speak, for not getting all the way there? If you fall short to some degree, is there still some lasting result?
Yes. So in Buddhism, which has been really influenced Taoism a lot. So people say Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, or Ruism, how it's now called, they're separate. They're really not separate. There's like so much crossover in how they influenced each other. So if you accumulate good karma by following this path, may it be a Buddhist, Ruist, Confucian, or Taoist, you're going to need less lifetimes until you get that human body again. So it might not be 500 years, it might just be 100. And that's the idea. You do pay off your debts, your karmic debts. And I like this example of a bank. If you have a lot of debts and they get less, then once the debts are paid off in less lives, you get another human body and another chance. That's the payoff. And yeah, being a good person, you could literally argue, like, if it's just have one life, why not be egotistical, selfish, and accumulate the most gain? And some people are like, well, if you need some sort of religion to be a good person, then you miss the point. But I do think that people need some rules. Like, if you stripped away all rules into anarchy, human beings are just not able to fulfill this ideal of everyone will be automatically good because you want to be treated good yourself. It just doesn't, or at least we haven't shown enough proof for that.
And speaking of rules, in the Dragon Gate lineage, are there particular moral codes? Do you have rules around food or fasting or celibacy and other kind of moral domains?
There are very different levels of rules. The most basic ones are very aligned with the 10 Commandments. So do not kill, do not steal, do not lie. There's actually also do not drugs. And there's also do not do not be lascivious, or do not engage in sexual misconduct. And especially the last two rules, they leave a little bit of room of interpretation. This is the base level for any novice. And then you have other levels, and it goes to a point where you have to have rules for everything, like don't step on the shadow of your teacher, like don't pee in the direction of the northern dipper. It's like hundreds and hundreds. And my teacher says if you follow those rules, in the last stage you're like a vegetable. You can't actually hold up a normal, any functional sort of life. And so it's all about stages when you want to, how many rules you apply to your life.
I wonder if you might say something about a typical core practices of your lineage, this Dragon Gate lineage. What's a typical day or week of practice like for you at the stage that you're currently working?
My days are, I don't think I have a very set routine, but my days would usually involve in the mornings some kind of lighting incense practice. Then I would write usually a daily protection talisman that I carry with me, and then probably most, like, it would also involve singing the scripture. So there's the morning scripture, which usually takes about an hour, and then there's the evening scripture, which takes about 40 minutes, and those are sung between 5 and 7 in the morning and 5 and 7 in the evening. And then it depends what happens during the rest of the day, whether I'm in clinic or whether I have a day off. I do still quite a bit of translation work. I'm wrapping up a few projects, and one very known translator, Louis Comiate, said that translation is also a form of cultivation. I never looked at it that way, because you're making Taoist text accessible to the English-speaking world, which in itself is considered a good deed or creating good karma. And I quite like that. It kind of was like, I never thought about it. I just thought about it as my part of my journey, my role, my task, my calling. And so I would probably put that in there as a cultivation practice. And then I would train like physical forms, usually for like 40 minutes to an hour. That's like the Bagua Zhang, we call it Babu form, and Tai Chi and Qigong. It's quite difficult to get the Qigong done now in the morning, which I used to do when I wasn't singing the scripture so much.
One thinks of Taoist practice, of course, popularly one thinks of Tai Chi and Qigong, right? But of course, there's a lot more to it than that. Why the singing of the scriptures? Can you give a sense of how that fits into the greater whole?
The greater whole is really that you're communicating with the spirits, and a lot of the practices, be it talisman, internal alchemy, has a link to the support of the higher, of the benign spirits that protect you. Because what happens is when you get closer to the end goal, your obstacles are going to be forces that pull you off that path. And so if you have accumulated good karma and you have connection with these positive, good, benign spirits, they're going to protect you on the path. And it's also a form of prayer. It also can be very healing, like just physically, for example, to develop good lung qi. I've seen people just listen to it and I consider it a form of meditation as well. And it's changing how we get into the day, just on a very practical and tangible level. But you mentioned two things. So Qigong and Tai Chi are associated with Taoism. They're actually not Taoist practices. Like when you look back, they're actually older. And it's also, you could be a Taoist without doing any Qigong and any Tai Chi. Just like some people are like, the I Ching is Taoist. No, it has been used by the Taoists, just like it has been used by the Ruists, but it's not a Taoist text. There's plenty of priests in China in a temple who will never mention the I Ching to you. They don't have a copy. Whereas as a Christian, you have a Bible. It might be on your nightstand. That's your book. For the Taoists, that's the Tao Te Ching. I think there's no way around it, but it's not the I Ching. You can say, I don't care about the I Ching. It doesn't mean anything to me. And you're still absolutely a Taoist. So the I Ching is definitely not classified as a Taoist text. It has later been adopted and utilized to explain internal alchemy with the hexagrams and trigrams, but it's actually a divination text. It existed like way before Taoism, so. But one has to be careful how things are begin labeled. Like if I didn't do Qigong, I'd still be as valid of a Taoist as not doing Qigong. The morning scripture is also a way of prayer. If someone is sick, to pray for a particular person to get better. If I was a bit New Age, I would say it's raising the energetic field or the vibration. These are actually words my teacher would also use because he watches a lot of modern videos, so he's very familiar with the lingo of modern age, New Age. people.
I wonder if you might say something more about this relationship to spirits and the role it plays and how one cultivates that. I seem to recall Mattias Daly, in one of the episodes, he was talking about that. There are different styles and approaches to internal cultivation. Some of them do use cultivating relationships with entities and spirits and gods and so on to help one on the path, and others don't. And for various reasons, I think he prefers the latter type. What if you might say something more about this? It seems really crucial to the Dragon Gate lineage practice that you've been describing.
I would say it's absolutely crucial. If you strip that away, Taoism is a religion, and I know that there is the discussion, is there philosophical Taoism? I belong to the camp where there is no philosophical Taoism, because the Tao Te Ching itself already shows that it's a cultivation text, and this Louis Commiathi really, in his translation, goes into that. Because there's also no word for a Taoist philosopher. You could say, I'm interested in Taoism, but you cannot, I wouldn't know how to say in Chinese, I'm a Taoist philosopher. It just doesn't exist as a word. So when you say in China, I'm a Taoist, they would assume you go to temples, you light incense, you revere the spirits. It's very simple. I've never seen it any different. So, and I doubt there was a Taoist philosopher around the time of Lao Tzu. People are like, oh, Lao Tzu never intended it to be a religion. Buddha didn't either, and Buddhism is still a religion, and no one questions that. And I think it's very similar, a religion that was formed after the passing of the person. And so with the spirits, this is really the core. Like, that's why you have the temples, the spirits in the temples. There's the Taoist pantheon also varies from lineage to lineage a little bit, who's the highest, but it's hierarchical. You could say it's like a society, but in the heavens. And with all the practices, even internal alchemy, you need the help. We are just so small compared to them. So you have them in incantations, you have them in the morning scripture. It's so part, it couldn't be stripped away. I understand that people like the secular ones. Maybe it's just moving away of Catholicism and Christianity and Protestantism, but you can't take that away from Taoism. At least for the Dragon Gate, it's ingrained. It's absolutely ingrained. And so a lot of the practices constantly, they evoke the names, and there's a deified version of Lao Tzu, which is Taishang Laojun. It's just everywhere. So someone who's like, they want to learn talismanic art, healing that involves talismans or incantations, and they say, I'm not into the religious side, it just doesn't work. It's almost like saying, I want to run a marathon, but I don't like jogging. It just won't work. Or I want to play football, but I don't like team sports. It's like, no, I understand if you don't want to do a certain thing, but it's just one. It's just unified.
And does one have a personal spirit or deity or a coterie of assistants like that, or are you relating to a sort of generic pantheon that you can call on for different purposes?
It is very generic. There might be someone like who's more important to certain lineages. For example, in our case, it's Zhenwu, the true warrior, or Xuanwu, the mysterious warrior. So basically, there's something called a taboo name. So it used to be Xuanwu. Then the emperor's name had Xuan in it, so you weren't allowed to say Xuan anymore. So they changed the name, I think it was 1017, into Zhenwu. Then later on they changed it back after the emperor wasn't reigning anymore. So it's the same person, but that's why the name changed. And that's the patron sage of Wudang. So the top temple at White Horse Mountain is dedicated to Zhenwu. We just refer to him as Zusha, the ancestral master. And so he's a martial artist, he's pretty rough. And so the Wudang sects, they have a strong affiliation with Zhenwu in particular. It sometimes translates the god of war, which I don't like to call him god, and he's much more than waging war. He's actually, the sword is actually to cut the illusions and to cut the thoughts, not other people. So it's a different perspective on what war means. Usually people would think of a battlefield of someone slashing the enemies, but it's more in the spiritual realm.
A sort of Taoist jihad.
That's an interesting combination of words.
Well, which some people take to be an outer war waging, and other people take to be an inner war waging, right?
Yeah, it's definitely an inner war, which we all fight, I believe, on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Gosh. You've mentioned a number of times now your teacher, Li Shifu, and how rare and singular an opportunity it is to study with him. I wonder if you might say something about him, your interactions with him, his level. Is he an immortal? Is he able to demonstrate various powers or remarkable qualities, etc.? What is it about him that you've found so remarkable? And I wonder if you might also talk a bit about your interactions with him.
Sure. So most people who meet Li Shifu, they, even if they don't speak Chinese, they feel something. It's quite amazing. I personally didn't have that strong sense, but they come to the temple like, I felt like coming home, or I felt like this is the right place. And I hear that a lot of times from people where it's not even about the meaning of the words that Li Shifu utters. It's, if you want to say, energetic about it. So he comes from a martial arts background, and so I can very much relate to him. He's like a father figure to me. He's teaching the traditional Chinese style, which is very different from Western. To give one example, when he praises you, that's a bad thing. If you do something and he goes like, yeah, good, it just means like you won't get any better. That's where you stop. So for me to give you feedback makes no sense. It's nonsensical. If he gives you very harsh feedback, like almost like putting you in your place, that means he hasn't given up on you. He wants you to improve. He has hope, and that's why he expends his energy teaching you. And that's very different from a Western concept. And that's one thing that's how the Chinese used to be taught. He has adapted a little bit because back in the days, he said he had to do punches like chongquan punches in Mabu in the horse dance. And his teacher would be in his room with the window open and would just listen to the sound, whether he got it right. And he had to do it for thousands and thousands of times. And his teacher would only demonstrate things for 3 times. And then you just on your own and you figure it out. That just doesn't work for Western. We just want to see it from all different angles. We want to have in-depth explanations. So there is really a Chinese style of learning, and he is still part of that generation. In terms of, is he an immortal? He definitely is an immortal. Is not. He says that. He says like, I'm normal. I go to the toilet. I eat. We see him do that. And he says, if I was an immortal, I wouldn't be here any longer. So that's very easy to find out, because he says he's just a commoner like everyone else. And that's why people like him so much, because he's not on a pedestal. He's like, I'm just like you. We're all the same. I breathe the same air. I've just walked on this path a little longer. And that also doesn't mean that you don't catch up with me and overtake me. And so he doesn't have this aura of a teacher looking down and here you seeking knowledge and I have it all. He's like, we're walking on this and we mutually learn from each other. And so he has got a very approachable nature without it getting too close that you don't have respect. Like he's running the village. Like someone said, he's like the boss of the village. They come to him when there's like huge arguments. His word carries weight. And so I'm trying to describe someone, when you see him, all I said is actually superfluous, because you would just feel it, that he demands this respect for him in a way. And I'll be honest with you, the word reverence in Chinese, Jingwei, has reverence, but it also has fear in it. And it's the same in German. The word for reverence is Ehrfurcht, which carries Furcht, which is fear. And so you revere someone, but you have this respect that borders into like wanting to make yourself small or fearful. I think it's very interesting, as you mentioned that you're interested in languages, so I like to compare languages in that respect, where when you say reverence, that's totally lost in the English word. And that's what I feel with him. I wouldn't say I'm afraid of him, but I have this jingwei, I have this reverence, this respect that's where I'm like, wow. But at the same time, I'm very close to him because I spent 7 years with him now, that I feel like I know him pretty well, like in our communication. And I do feel like I have I've established a very good channel of communicating with him. In terms of sometimes just advising him of like, hey, this is how a foreigner would see this if you do that. You might not have that intention, but this is how it's perceived. or this and that won't work for a foreigner.
You sometimes explain to him possible cultural clashes from your point of view?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Because he knows foreigners, but obviously growing up in a foreign country, you just get an in-depth look of how someone feels about something. There's also the other thing in teaching Chinese style is he has to find out, he knows very exactly how much he can burden you with. He says, if I'm too harsh, you might break under the weight like a bridge. So there's also different layers. It's not just praise and criticism. There's like different layers where it's like, okay, this guy can take a lot. He will know, it will spur him on to do even better. But if it's too much, the person might be like, oh, I'll never make it, I give up. It's just like a sports person. Like a good coach knows when they tell them run 10 more laps, or when they know like this is going to break them and they might not come back tomorrow. Which I think is a very praiseworthy quality for a teacher to have.
Yes, certainly. You know, with great masters, sometimes let me put it this way. With such remarkable people, sometimes I wonder the degree to which that those remarkable qualities, etc., have been bestowed by the practice and the training. And if perhaps a person has a natural charisma also, or a natural brilliance in some ways, perhaps a cognitive brilliance or physical brilliance, something along those lines, it's talent if you want. Sometimes I've heard it said that, gosh, no matter what this person taught, I would learn that because they are just so remarkable in a way. What do you think about that when you think of Li Shifu? Do you think he's a remarkable person anyway, and the Taoist training has added more or brought more out or so, or do you think it's all really come through that Taoist training?
I think there's something genetic because he comes from a very, very poor background. And I think he's got 8 siblings and they're all doing incredibly well. Like one of his sister lives in Turkey. His younger sister lives in Australia. One of them was dealing with oil in Iran. They all are like very successful businessmen coming from nothing. And so I think Li Shifu could have done anything. He could have easily been one of those and just raking in millions, but he just decided to go for a religious path. And sometimes he even gives people instructions how to prepare fish. Like it was probably 20, 30 years ago, the last time he cooked any fish, but he's actually a very good cook too, I think. So he could be running a restaurant easily as well. And he's very interested in a lot of things. So people come to him and be like, oh, I have these little bags with like pickled vegetables. This is my company. And he gives them like really constructive criticism. It's like, oh, this has a very good palate. I don't think I've had this before. And like, this is just average. This just tastes like any other. Like he has a very in-depth opinion on a lot of things that are helpful, because he would be like, why do I go up to a temple to talk to Taoist about my pickled vegetable business? That seems to be not his line of knowledge, right? But it is actually not the case. And then obviously he knows a lot about Taoism, so he would go to a tailor and be like, hey, your Taoist socks, they're actually too low. I can't tie them on this acupuncture point, Susan Li. They need to be longer. They used to be longer. Why are you making them shorter? And I'm not sure if the tailor takes it on board, but he has well-meant advice for people to do things properly in all areas. Like this could be something like very simple, but he always is like, oh, I have something to say about it. And they sometimes probably think like, oh, what does this Taoist know about this stuff? And they just dismiss it. But sometimes I believe they do take it on board, especially if they hike up to the mountain, to the temple, to be like, hey, what do you think about this? He's also very good at building. He built the temple. He actually drew up the blueprints for building the temple. It's like, well, where did you learn this? Like, it's not something you just learn on the side. And he tells like the form and how to build the temple. And it's just like, he knows a lot of things. He knows, it's quite incredible. Friend was like, because Li Shifu was also very good at singing, he also learned how to sing O Sole Mio in Italian, which is very good actually. And my friend was like, maybe he was never good at singing, but he really just worked really hard for it. And that's what he mentioned, like through cultivation, through training, he got really good at it. But then we just see the result and it's like, shit, he's good at everything, but it's actually not the case. He had to work just as hard as everybody else. And I do believe the people that had to work hard to get results, they're actually the better teachers because they've walked the stony path rather than just, I was just talented, I was just really fast all the time, so I never had to learn any technique.
Does he have disciples who have attained similarly remarkable level?
I don't think so. I don't know about his Chinese disciples, but I do know that we from the first course, we've gone very different paths. There's actually a few. What's very fulfilling for me is that a lot of people have gone on and studied Chinese medicine, but yeah, I think we're still falling like way short. It kind of depends on in which respect. Like, of course, his knowledge of Taoism, of talisman, of healing, it's unprecedented. But in sort of, I think we'd all do our best, but I wouldn't say that there's one single disciple way, like, oh yeah, you really stepping into the footsteps of all the areas that Li Shifu excelled. That's certainly not me, but I wouldn't really. Some people are better at healing, some people are better at the martial arts, like Lindsay Wei is very good at the martial arts. Other people might be better at singing because they already had a singing background. And so I think he's still a role model that a lot of us sort of maybe, yeah, it can be a bit daunting, but look up to and try to use as an inspiration. I think that's the way to look at it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you ever wonder, given how remarkable he seems to be, as you say, genetically, you said the word genetically or naturally, do you ever wonder about the potential for a less gifted human being in those arts?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I asked you if he has any disciples who've been able to attain his remarkable level in these various different fields, as you've mentioned, and you said no. And you've also said that he's a very naturally brilliant man from a family that seems to produce naturally brilliant, whole generation of them. And so, do you question, or have you ever questioned or wondered about the potential of less gifted disciples, given that there are none that have met his level?
So, are you trying to ask if that is still possible for less gifted people to attain that level?
I've known people who are very, very gifted in whatever field it might be, brilliant minds, etc. And I've studied with some people like that. And whilst I am able to make great progress under their tutelage, the chances of me matching just their raw talent and gift are slim. So I'm never going to reach their level. But I might be able to maximize my potential. So maybe that's a better way of putting it. A student's maximum potential may be less than the teacher's maximum potential. So therefore, the student, even maxed out under the tutelage of a great teacher, will himself never become as great as the teacher. And you've emphasized how impressive Li Shifu's natural capacities are. And then on top of that, a lifetime of training, etc., and all these other things, the nature and the nurture have come together. You've also mentioned that there are no students who've been able to reach that level, come close to it. Presumably that's due to a combination of less natural capacity, given his is so remarkable, and less training opportunity, given the way life shakes out. Not many people can train from the young childhood age in traditional arts of any kind. Have you ever questioned how far you can really go in these arts when somebody like that is the example?
Okay, I understand now. So, of course, it does cross your mind, but at the same time, would it be better if you wouldn't see what is possible? So I think it's always good to be reminded what is possible, and we don't know where your talent stops, because I believe it's 10% talent, and that just decides that you're fast on the path, but the rest is effort. So I've met people who were very talented in Taekwondo. There was this kid, he would fight me in the training session. He was shorter than me, he was much lighter, and he fought with me on the same level. I had problems beating him. And then he would go into the competition, he would fight someone his size, and he could not win it. I was like, you are so good in training, you can be in the national team easy. You can do something on the European Championship level. I'm convinced of it. He had so much talent, but there was something missing. And so it's a little bit like, where's the effort that comes into that? And I think effort beats natural talent any given day. You just take longer, and it might be harder, and it might be just more discouraging, but you have to also find out where's your maximum. You could be like, oh, this is the maximum. When is your maximum reached? When you're 40, when you're 80? And use it as an inspiration. Use it, be like, oh, this is what someone achieved. And that's why I mentioned maybe Li Shifu wasn't very good at singing, but he really wanted to be good at it. And he just practiced and practiced it. And then I met musicians who said, anyone can learn singing. There's no limit in that. You don't have to have a vocal cord. You might not be able to sing as many octaves as some singers, but you can learn singing. It's something you learn. When it comes to physical activity, both you and me are not going to become rhythmic gymnasts. That's just a fact. But in Taoism, that's not the ultimate goal. Like the physical things, they're going to get less. You're going to do Tai Chi. There's someone in Beijing, my teacher said he would just do like one movement all day long, super slow. I think he said it would take like 10, 20 minutes for this one movement. And one of my friends said, that's what I want to do when I'm old. Like, you don't want to do jump kicks or no-handed cartwheels. Like, what's the point in that? That's not going to bring you closer to immortality. It might bring you closer to having some nice Instagram followers. But so the highest goal has no limitations as long as you have good cognition, if you're cognitively sound. If you get Alzheimer's, and my teacher says that, and that's sometimes hard for people to accept. If you get dementia or Alzheimer's, your cultivation stops because you cannot do the practices. But if you have that, even if you're in a wheelchair, highly disabled, you can do it. My teacher says as long as you have a last breath, you can do it, but your brain needs to be functional and not just being alive. Like if you're in a coma, your brain is there's still oxygen going to the brain and blood, but you don't cultivate. Well, having said that, I don't know what people do in a coma, if there's a way to cultivate in a coma, but not in a intentional way. Like Stephen Hawking, for example, he could become an immortal, no problem, because you don't need to be able to walk. And I find that very interesting, because otherwise you'd be like, oh, once you hit 80, 90, your go at immortality ends, and that's not the case. And Li Shifu has some vices too. He smokes a lot. He's like, learn the good things from me, don't learn the bad things. And I know this is a bad thing, but if I stop smoking, you won't see me again. So be thankful that I still smoke. Which means if he stopped smoking, he would be in a cave cultivating and he might not come out. And it has been one of the fears of a few students that he just disappears one day, and I've tried to get like a promise, like if he leaves, that he at least informs me that I can see him the last time. He's like, no. Or he doesn't answer. He's like, just looks at me. It's like, okay, no, I definitely won't do that. Inform you. And so that could happen. That could happen in 2 months. That could happen in 20 years. We don't know, but it's a possibility when he gets this, not even an inclination, when he gets an omen, a sign, some manifestation, that he's like, now it's time to stop. And of course, if you meditate in a cave, which is called seclusion or biguan, you can't smoke cigarettes. That doesn't work that way. So use it as an inspiration, not as a discouragement. That's the bottom line of my long spiel here. Which, it can be daunting and discouraging, but it shouldn't be. It should be like, oh, cool, this is possible. Just when you see someone do something physical, like I've seen someone do a double back tuck on grass, and I didn't think it was possible. For many years, I thought no one can do this. And then you see it, and then I saw how this guy prepared, and he lands on his face, and he lands on his ankles, that it looks like it's breaking his ankles. And you see this, it's a 10-minute video, watch the whole thing, and in the end, he lands a double back tuck standing on grass, flat. I'm like, I didn't know that was possible. I'm not going to do it. I never will do it. It's still an inspiration that someone put his health on the line to achieve that.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much. Wow, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for sharing so much about your own journey and path and life experiences. Is there anything else as we start to come towards the end of our interview that you'd like to discuss, or you'd like to mention, anything that ought to be said that hasn't been?
I just want to mention the Purple Cloud Press that I'm running, which is which sprang forth from the idea of preserving texts and also enabling other authors to be paid not sufficiently but fairly, because a lot of the larger companies pay something between 2 and 5% of the royalties. And so that's why I founded Purple Cloud Press, where I always pay more than 50%, because I believe the lion's share should go to the authors to encourage them and also to free up more time to do translations, because there's thousands and thousands of books just in Taoism that haven't been translated. And then you have the equal amount, if not more, in Chinese medicine. And I still don't know why some millionaire in China doesn't decide to just translate, having hundreds of them translated. But it's a small market, it's a niche market, but it's also something that I want to be part in as long as I find it gratifying and find enjoyment in working with other people and making these works accessible. Like for me personally, like this one book I published, The 49 Barriers of Cultivating the Tao, I know if I hadn't published it, it would have never seen, then no one else would just take 2 years of their life into a project like this. And for me, that's very, that brings me a lot of joy, knowing that now people can read it, and otherwise it would have never come to life, come into existence.
Purple Cloud Press, the link is in the show notes, or you can just Google Purple Cloud Press and find the website. It's really great project indeed. And when you look ahead in terms of the rest of your life, the next 5, 10, 15 years or so, what do you see coming?
To sum it up, it's really the ultimate goal is to create something like a community similar to how it's at the temple, where people can live short-term or long-termish and be taught all the aspects. So Li Shifu always talks about comprehensiveness, where as a Taoist you should know these things, and the I Ching with Li Shifu also falls into that, because he knows the I Ching very, very well. Again, which doesn't mean that any Taoist would have to learn the I Ching, but you would have physical arts, you would have healing that you can learn or receive, you would have the scripture, you would have some sort of temple structure, all under one roof, where you can take yourself a little bit out of society, but not having to travel to China, into a foreign culture with foreign food, just something more accessible for people from a sort of biggish city. So Li Shifu calls it a longevity center. I think that's quite a good term for it. That's the 5-10 year plan to have something built like that.
And what do you need to make that happen?
Location is really the thing. There's certain requirements for the location. It cannot be too damp. It also needs to be a soil where you can make a step towards self-sufficiency, so you can grow your own vegetables, like not commercially, but just for yourself. It also should be a place where you can see the sunrise, because the morning Qigong that we do is done when you see the red ball of the sun. So if it's behind a mountain, it's completely taken away from it. And it needs to be accessible from some kind of airport. Like if you have to drive for 6 hours from the nearest airport, that's not feasible for you to pick people up or organize a pickup. So that's one of the things. So someone who says, I can't go to China, it's too far, or there's too many restrictions, I don't get my medicine, I can't get my insulin, or what have you, they could be like, oh, this is actually some sort of like step in the middle where it's feasible for me. And even if I just come for 1 week, because if you go to China, you lose 2-3 days just from jet lag and travel, and you wouldn't have that. So it's about all these different factors. But it's work in progress.
Great. Well, best of luck with that. And thank you once again for the fascinating conversation. Johan Hausen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.